Hello everybody, welcome back to 4th Age Guides. In this episode, we are looking at the campaign prospects for the Kingdom of the Dwarves in the 4th Age Total War. The Dwarven Campaign is located in a bit of a different spot from the other campaigns. So if you start from the beginning menu here, you click Single Player, Non-Managed Campaigns, then choose the Dwarven Campaign, and you'll find this option here. As always, we recommend that you set the campaign difficulty to Decidedly Tookish, and the battle difficulty for Bull Roaring. That's kind of what the mod has been balanced for. Looking at the map here, you can see that the dwarves start with extremely far-flung settlements. You don't even have like 2 or 3 theaters, it's more like 4. You've got the Blue Mountains over here that are even separated from each other. You've got the Iron Hills, Erebor region. You've got a single stronghold here just to the southwest of the Sea of Rune, and as you progress, you will be taking settlements that are right in the middle of the map. For example, the Dwarves or Moria, Mount Gundabad, and some other settlements up in the far north. Apart from that, the Dwarven Campaign is extremely open-ended, and you can make of it pretty much whatever you want. If you want to try to unite all these territories, that would be quite the task, but it's certainly possible. It would take a long time. You'd have to go to war with a lot of factions, but you certainly could make it happen. On the other hand, maybe you want to play a campaign of trying to collect all of the valuable trade resources on the map, trying to collect valuable hirelings, which we will talk about briefly here, and that is also a fun way to play. So the dwarves have a lot of open-endedness in their campaign goals, apart from those very few initial goals to maintain your homelands and take back Moria and Gundabad. You're pretty much set to do whatever you want. So let's jump into the campaign here. This is the starting position for the dwarves, and one of the things you'll notice is that this is a bit different from how the AI dwarves start. So if you are playing any other faction in the 4th Age, you'll notice that the dwarven faction starts in possession of Moria. When you are playing as the dwarves, however, you'll notice that you do not. And I've already taken off the fog of war here so we can get a sense of what's going on around the map. The Dwarves is indeed in rebel hands, and you might want to make this an early priority. This is a very, very wealthy settlement. Even if it's relatively unconnected from the rest of your territory, a lot of that income is going to be from mining, and you can certainly trade with your neighbors. It's also a good idea to grab Ostenethil as well, because it's completely uninhabited. In some cases, though, you may have to buy it from another faction if you don't want to go to war with Tharbad, for example. Tharbad tends to be the faction that goes over here very early, and if they beat you to it, you could just buy it off them. That's the thing about the Dwarven Campaign. You will have money to do just about whatever you want. You'll have money to build everything you want to build, money to do diplomatic deals, and even potentially bribe things, buy settlements. So it's definitely worth working on that economy to make it even stronger so you can help meet your goals. You'll also remember from the battle guide video for the dwarves that you have an incredibly solid military. Your units are very defensively oriented and very strong in melee. They do have some shortcomings in the relative lack of ranged units and almost total lack of cavalry. In fact, the only way that you will see cavalry will be, in terms of from your native settlements, will be from Nerrig Zagil, where you can eventually train a unit of Wain bows. So the Dwarven Wain bow, this is the closest you get to Cav. This is slower than any cavalry unit on the map, so it's certainly not going to give you a great deal of speed, but it is going to give you a certain amount of mobility on the battlefield. Again, though, you're not going to use Wain bows really for Cav. What you're going to use for Cav are hirelings and mercenaries. And as such, you will need to start thinking not only about recapturing dwarven territories and your victory conditions, but what hireling territories you want to go after. So we do need to talk about hirelings. In your dwarven territories, if you look at your military development, any one of your barracks, you'll notice that you have a native recruitment, and these are all dwarven units. These are essentially units that you can train from your homelands only. You will never be able to train dwarves outside of basically the places where you start, and a couple of other victory conditions for you. Orodengrid, which is just to the northwest of this little cluster of settlements here, and Dwarven itself. Those are the only 2 places where you can train dwarves that you do not already hold. And when you consider that fact, along with the fact that population growth for the dwarves is extremely low, and in, I think, every case requires you to have low taxes to see any growth at all, then you will quickly realize that no matter how wealthy you are, you will struggle to field full stacks of dwarven units. It will just be difficult for your population to support that much. So instead, as you expand, you'll become increasingly reliant on hirelings. Hirelings, though, are not trained out of the barracks. They're trained out of a different line of buildings, Waypost Buildings, we call them. And they eventually they're related to the traders. So let's see where they're located here. Wayposts, right underneath the roads buildings. These require traders for you to build the tiers, and there are 3 of them. And if you click on the first tier, you'll notice that this does provide training. Hireling spears for tier 1, and then a bunch of other stuff for tier 3. Tier 2 is going to be local specific units, and tier 3 may be some other local specific units, but it's always going to include hireling guards. So basically, these are the 2 unit types, hireling spears at tier 1, hireling guards at tier 3, that will be the constant in all of your Waypost line of buildings. The middle tier is going to give you region-specific hirelings. So in the case of, let's say, Erebor, hireling Dale Longbowmen, hireling Hearth Troops, and hireling Riders. So these are, as you might be able to tell, very useful units. But of course, we can't build these units here. We can't train them here. Why? Well, because in the 4th Age, we have divided populations conceptually into Mannish or non-Mannish. So much like with the Elven faction, you have essentially a building that determines what your population is. In this case, it is the regional building here that's represented by the open book on a red background, and this is currently set to Dwarven lands. As you might expect, Erebor, as well as all your homelands, are going to start as Dwarven lands. Now, you have the option of changing this. You have another book building here that is called not Dwarven lands, but Western Wilderland, and if you click this for the information, it tells you in the population effects that building this building, or establishing Western Wilderland in the nearby lands, reflects the ruler settling men in the province. This is a one-way process, which brings population growth and allows Mannish and only Mannish troops to be recruited here. What this means is that if you start construction of this building and get it completed, it's a one-way trip. You will never be able to build Dwarven lands here again, and Erebor from this point on will not be able to train any of your Dwarven units. You will only be training hirelings. Now that might be fine for you. You might think that's great. Your population will grow much more than in Dwarven lands. You will have a greater tax base, and you will have hireling units, and maybe you figure you can train dwarves from other settlements instead. So that is certainly one way to do it, but I would be extremely hesitant to do that, and to be honest, I never go that route myself when I'm playing either as the Elves or the Dwarves. I always keep the Elven lands or Dwarven lands right where they are. Instead, what you may likely do is go into other settlements, Mannish settlements, and use that population for your hirelings. So the types of units that you can get out of your wayposts in Erebor will be very similar to the types of units that you can get from your wayposts in Dale, Esgaroth, Eodor, for example. So those types of units, the Longbowmen hirelings, the hireling riders, the hireling hearth troops, you will find those available right here in Eodor. Now, this is also a little bit different from most other campaigns in the 4th Age, which see Dale start in possession with Eodor. Instead, for the Dwarves, we decided to make things a little more interesting and have a rebel army here and Northrune in a much stronger position just south of your starting point. Now, it's still not very likely that you're going to come under attack around here from Northrune, but what this does is it allows you the option to fight Northrune and take this important settlement to train Northmen-style hirelings. That would be a really good option. This also benefits from the livestock resource, which allows you to eventually improve the armor of those troops. So I would recommend taking Eodor relatively early, taking it back from Northrune, or taking it from the rebels if you want to take it early enough. You do need to consider your northern border to some extent, though, because I do find that Barraz-Dûm may come under attack from either Rune or North Rune, because there is a pass just to the north, and from this pass, our enemy army could march down here and around. It's worth then maybe building a watchtower or just keeping an eye on this part of the map to make sure that you don't get surprised by an army putting your settlement under siege. Because as you'll notice, it's very rare for you to be able to reinforce from one Dwarven settlement to another. In fact, this part of the map is by far the most highly concentrated area of Dwarven settlements. Once you take Orodengrin, you can train Dwarves out of here as well. And then you'll have just about 4 settlements in this region that are reasonably close to one another to reinforce. But again, if you only have, say, a single garrison unit in here, Rune could theoretically march around and assault before you could get reinforcements marching all the way from this part of the map. So you do need to sort of keep an eye out there. By far the most vulnerable settlement is Nareg-Zagil. This is in the middle of a lot of other factions. There's no nearby reinforcements. Certainly you can march some troops down from the north, and that's doable. But you're likely to come under siege here from factions like Rune, and potentially some of these other Northmen factions, depending on how things go. Initially, though, you'll want to trade with all of your neighbors and work on your income. But as Rune begins to expand, and they will expand fairly well when you're playing as the Dwarves, they're likely to take Erebos and Breg-Estelad. They're already at war with you, as a matter of fact, and so they will be very likely to send an army up towards Nareg-Zagil. The best advice I can give on this part of the map is to take the fight to Rune, rather than sit around and let them besiege you here at your capital. You'll find that you'll be doing a lot of leaving skeleton garrisons in your Dwarven settlements and marching out with your armies into the field to take settlements from your enemy and make that the target of their attention. Of course, your Dwarven settlements are very strong. They're very well defended. They've got great walls and towers and lots of choke points for your superlative infantry to defend. But again, you don't want to have these places under siege. These are your money makers, and a lot of that income is from trade. As you can see here, all of this trade is out of Nareg-Zagil. If this is under siege, this all goes away. So a huge part of your income relies on peace in the region, and you can maintain that by getting trade and potentially alliances with your Northmen neighbors, and then moving down to take the fight towards Rune. In the central region, again, we have Dwerodelf over here, just to the sort of the south middle part of the map, and this is a very fun initial crusade, so to speak. I like to get about a half stack in the first years of the campaign. Get them together from Erebor, Gunduthorin. I like to get some Dwarves of the Iron Hills from over here and march them to the west to join with my heir and maybe even my faction leader as well, or maybe another good commander type family member, and send them on the road. You don't need a full stack, even though Moria is very well defended by essentially a full stack of Orcish units, including some trolls, some wargs. So there are some very intimidating units down here, but your Dwarven units are excellent. If you make sure that you've got Dwarven axe throwers, you have a few of the Dwarven long axes to handle the trolls, you should be doing fine. Pick up mercenaries in the area, and as you go, you'll also find mercenaries to round out your forces. I like my route to essentially be what you would expect, to either head down around Framsburg and down this way, or to head down and pass over Old Ford and down through here. The one thing you do have to watch out for is Karas Galadon and the Elves. The Elves are a faction that you will want to trade with for sure, because there are several points where you do border them. Not necessarily right here, but as you get into Dwerodelf, you will border them and you'll want trade going here. But over in the west, as you capture Lune and Sarn Ford, you will be bordering Mithlond, and you already actually do border some Elven settlements just to your west of the Blue Mountains. So it's worth getting trade rights with them early, and potentially even an alliance. Now, the Elves are a passive faction, so they're not going to expand and attack you, but what they do like to do is leave units on their territories, so you don't want to let your army get stuck on elven territory because they are extremely likely to be attacked. And the only way for you to get to Dwarven, or the best way for you to get to Dwarven, is by passing through Lorien. And there is one ford here that acts as a choke point. So I would recommend bringing an emissary or a scout if you have one, and send him through just to see if there's an army waiting here. If there is, you're going to have to wait for it to move. If you can get maybe an alliance and military access, that could make things easier as well. And then you can just head up and conquer Dwarven. There is a passage out to the west from Dwarven, so you can eventually project your power towards Tharbad and potentially even down towards Dunland. And in terms of settlements to grab, I debated whether or not I should mention this or should I not spill the beans. But if you've watched my Dwarven Let's Play, you know what's up anyway. The Outpost of Dol Baran is a place to find a very powerful Easter egg unit for the Dwarves. If you don't mind getting a little gunpowder in your Middle-earth, Dwarven blunderbusses are an excellent unit, and I think it's worth grabbing them all the time. So I send my troops who have taken Moria down south, usually down through here, to help take the Outpost of Dol Baran. Another thing you might do is just consider purchasing this from whoever has it. A lot of times it'll be Rohan, but it might be Dunland. If you buy it, then you can just get it, and you may want to still send some Dwarven units down to help garrison it. This is not a place where you can train any other Dwarven troops. Just the blunderbusses are the only thing you can train here, and they are great, but they're not great at defending against ranged weapons. And if you end up going to war with Dunland, which you may if you want to maintain your power in the area, then you're going to need some more solid units with good shields and good armor to defend against these types of units. But really, otherwise, your expansion prospects for the Dwarves are very much open-ended. You will want to maybe look for valuable resources on the map, which is one of the reasons I recommend taking Austenethel, because it does have gemstones as a resource. There's nothing you can do with this settlement. It's essentially just ruins, but if you command it, you'll at least be getting the mining income from these gemstones, and you can also get some nice trade going with Dwarven and with potentially whoever owns this, or maybe it'll be you. With Dwarven, you will have one way of crossing over the Misty Mountains. There are a couple of other points that you can do this to potentially link up your territories. The High Pass Stronghold is another Orcish settlement, very strongly held. The Bjornings are likely to go after this, and so this is another faction you may want to consider trade military access with, but you may end up at war with them if you try to own the High Pass Stronghold. Because they like to go for it themselves. Of course, if you go to war with the Bjornings, that's not so terrible. They do have some nice valuable territory in the Anduin Vale. You could take it for yourself. The hirelings here are not the best. They're going to be basic woodman axes, but it's better than nothing, and it'll be a nice way to connect Moria with sort of your northeastern holdings. In the Western Theater, I do recommend taking Loon. No one is around here to take it, so you may as well grab it, and it'll give you some trade income with the Elves. And again, taking Sarnford is also a good option. Three Ways offers iron, so if you feel like extending into this region, you could certainly do that. And then you're very close to Dwarven, actually. The problem is that these provinces, Hollowbold and the Northern Arid Luan Gabilgathal, tend to have really low population. You don't start with any significant armies here, so it's going to take a while for you to get enough dwarves to really feel like you can conquer super aggressively over here. You do have to be careful about Tharbad. They are not involved with any wars initially, and so you might want to wait for them to go to war with somebody before you start expanding and getting next to them. They can grow very strong. But in terms of other factions in the north, you have the Reunited Kingdom with relatively small presence here, and a Dunabar with a larger presence in the northeast. And so you may have to reckon with them. A Dunabar does tend to come out on top in the north. They tend to take some of these rebel settlements, so you might find yourself expanding towards them. But in terms of value, the best provinces to take are probably in Numinas, Fornost, Bree. These settlements are large, they're pretty well developed, and they have good trade income. Bree in particular does have pipeweed as a resource, and so that might be a fun settlement for the dwarves to take for themselves, depending on who owns it. Otherwise, you may think about what hirelings are available in the region. Now, in the battle video, we did talk about notable places to go, and in terms of hirelings, I like going south. It's really weird, but it's interesting to see dwarves, or to think about dwarves heading far into the south to go to these mysterious new lands looking for valuable trade resources. It's definitely possible to get a really good dwarven army together, probably by putting it together around here, because again, you're going to have the highest concentration of dwarven units in this part of the map. Combine them with some forces from Nareg-Zagil and send them south, maybe around through the east actually, via Khand, and then eventually, ultimately over towards Harad and Umbar. There's a lot of ivory in this part of the world. There is some wine in Harondor, and there's incense as well in Far Harad in a couple of settlements, and in Khand. And these are valuable trade resources. Now the problem is, if you go down here and just grab a valuable trade resource, it's likely that you're going to be at war with your neighbors, and so you're not going to be doing any trading unless you expand further, which you could certainly do. But the other reason to come down here is just for bragging rights and for the hirelings. Not only are there great mercenary types to take down here, but there are hirelings that you are able to access as the dwarves. There's a great variety. So if you conquer Khandian territories, you can train your own hireling horse archers. If you conquer into Far Harad, you can train your own powerful skirmishers. If you conquer into Harondor or Harad itself, you might find cavalry or spearmen who can hold the line. So there's some really interesting stuff, and there's a great incentive for you just to get out and explore as the dwarves, to not really play the I'm going to eliminate my sworn enemy game, but to play the I'm going to go off and do my own mysterious trade business kind of game, which seems to me very fitting for the dwarves. So again, the challenge for the dwarves is going to come down not to the battles, not to the economy, but to logistics. It's going to be a matter of how do you get your soldiers where they need to be, how do you support them, can you build up quickly enough in a local place to get hirelings, can you use the local mercenaries, and can you hold out against overwhelming odds in the face of incredible numbers, especially as these Easterlings are likely to be your enemies. It all makes for a pretty interesting campaign. So I hope you'll give them a shot. They are an interesting faction and well worth your time. So thank you very much for watching. I hope this has been helpful, and I'll check you out on the next one. Take care, everybody.